You know, Think Straight, it's a book title that doesn't beat around the bush, does it?
It's very direct.
It's like, come on, get your head in the game. We're diving into Darius Foroux's work today.
Yeah.
And he's not just saying think more, he's saying think better.
Right.
And you sent over excerpts from the book.
I did.
It's a really cool mix, I gotta say. Part personal stories, part these big, like, worldview ideas.
Mm-hmm.
What strikes you as the most interesting thing about his style when you read it?
I think the most interesting thing about his style is that it could have very easily been an extremely lofty philosophical book.
Oh, for sure.
But instead, he brings it down to earth.
Yeah.
And he grounds it in pragmatism,
Yeah.
which I think is part of what makes it such a useful book to actually use.
Yes.
Not just kind of nod along to.
Totally. He's not just giving you a theory. He's like, here's how it works in the real world.
Exactly.
And one of the things he puts out there right away, like almost a challenge, is this idea we become what we think about.
Right.
And that's almost a cliche, right? Like you hear that and you're like, okay, yeah.
You see that on Instagram.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But have you ever noticed how easy it is to get like trapped in your own thoughts?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like you're stuck because you think you're stuck.
It's the difference between letting your thoughts dictate your reality
Yeah.
versus choosing which thoughts to feed and to cultivate.
Yes.
Like tending a garden, you know.
It's so true.
He tells this great story about trying to find an apartment in London.
Oh, that was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, but it's also like, oh my gosh, I've totally been there.
Yeah, it's very relatable.
His whole family flies over to help him move. They get there and
And he doesn't have a place to live.
he doesn't actually have the place.
Yeah.
Like that is peak chaotic mind moment.
Right. I think we've all had those moments where we let the thinking get ahead of us.
It's so true.
And he talks about, spiraling into these kind of like overdramatic thought patterns,
Yeah.
which actually makes solving the problem at hand so much harder.
Oh, 100%.
And so I think what he's getting at with this kind of image of chaos versus clarity
Yeah.
is something that I think a lot of people probably craves,
Mm-hmm.
which is that mental decluttering so that you can actually move forward.
Oh, I love that.
It's almost like, we know that physical exercise helps to clear your head. Maybe we need mental workouts too.
That is a great segue because that's exactly where he goes next. This whole idea of thinking as a workout.
Yes.
Have you ever had those days where you're mentally exhausted, but you like haven't even left the house?
All the time.
I know, right? And it's like, what is that? So how does he explain that kind of mental fatigue?
So he actually compares it to physical exertion, but for your mind.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, learning new things,
yeah.
grappling with new concepts.
Okay.
Those are our mental reps.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
And just like physical training, the more that you consistently challenge yourself, the greater your capacity becomes.
I love it. And it's so cool to think about this, that, training your mind. It's not a new concept, right? I mean, Socrates, he was all about questioning everything.
Yeah.
Like constantly poking holes in your own beliefs. And Descartes, I think, therefore I am.
Exactly.
Like we are in good company if we're trying to like master our own thoughts.
100%.
It's like this long lineage of people being like, there's something to this thinking thing.
Right. This quest for clarity and for mental mastery, it's a thread that runs through human history, which I think is kind of cool.
It's true. It's like we're all part of this grand experiment.
Yes, exactly.
We're not alone in trying to figure this out.
And, speaking of figuring it out, this is where I think Foroux gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because he reminds us that this path to clarity that we're all on, it's not always a straight line.
It's so true.
It's messy. It's a maze, as he puts it.
And that resonates so much, especially for anyone listening who has these big goals.
Yes.
It's so easy to fall into that trap, I think, especially early on, where it's like, it's got to be linear.
Right.
Step 1, step 2, success.
You got it.
And then life's like, nope, detour.
Yeah.
Throws you completely off course, and you're like, wait, I had a plan.
And it can be very disorienting.
Yes. So what does he say for those of us who fall into that trap of thinking it's all got to be a straight line?
He calls it the linear thinking trap.
Okay.
And I think, his story about real estate is such a perfect example of this.
Oh, tell me more about that. I want to hear more about that story, yeah.
Yeah, so he couldn't find a place to live in London that was affordable.
Right.
And it was really throwing him off.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it led him to invest in real estate back in his hometown.
Wow.
And he had never even, that wasn't even on his radar.
Wow.
So it's like sometimes these detours lead us to opportunities.
That's so true. Sometimes the universe has a better plan, even if we don't see it in that moment.
Absolutely.
It's like, hold my coffee, I got this.
Right. And to your point about the detours, he uses this really cool visual of the brain being like a network of connections.
I love that. Okay, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So just because we don't see how all the dots connect right now
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they aren't contributing to the bigger picture in some way.
That's so true. It's like that thing, too, where people are like, oh, I learned this one skill and I never used it. And it's like, but it got you to where you are.
Exactly.
Like, it's all part of the journey. So what do you think about that in relation to, like, learning new things, even if you're not sure how they'll be useful right away?
It's like Steve Jobs said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward.
Oh, that's such a good one.
Yeah.
I love that quote.
So every experience that we have, every piece of knowledge that we gather, it's all adding to that mental tapestry.
Yeah.
You just never know when something seemingly random is going to be the missing piece later on.
It's true. It's all those little puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
It's like we're collecting them, and we don't even know what the picture is yet.
Right, exactly. And sometimes those dots connect in ways you totally don't expect,
Right.
which I guess is a good segue to these mental shortcuts. Foroux talks about heuristics.
Okay, yeah, heuristics.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed how you tend to, fall back on certain ways of thinking or making decisions, even if they haven't always worked out that great in the past?
Oh, 100%. It's like our brains are trying to be efficient.
Right.
But sometimes efficient means you just keep making the same mistake.
Exactly.
Like that saying, familiarity breeds. Well, maybe not contempt, but definitely ruts.
Yes. He calls that out familiarity bias. It's like that tendency to stick with what we know, even if it's not really the best choice.
It's comfortable.
It is comfortable. It's familiar. But it can also keep us stuck. Remember his story about the business trip to Thailand?
Oh my gosh, yes. That one, I felt that one deep in my soul.
Yeah.
When you agree to something way in advance based on how you feel right now.
Yes.
And then later you're like, why did I do that?
Exactly.
It's like promising a friend you'll help them move, and then moving day comes around.
And you're like, what have I done?
I know, right? Like there are a million other things I'd rather be doing.
But his point is, even slowing down for a minute to consider those future implications can save you so much mental anguish later.
That's so true. It's like we need to be nicer to our future selves.
Yes.
Give them a little more say in the decision-making process.
Give them a vote.
Right. So we've got all these thinking traps, these biases. It's kind of overwhelming.
It can feel like it.
So what's the solution? Is there a way out of the maze, as he calls it?
He offers up pragmatism as a potential antidote.
Okay, pragmatism.
Yeah, and I love how he breaks it down. It's basically true is what works.
Oh, I like that.
It's simple, but
It's very straightforward.
it's profound,
Yeah. It is, yeah.
It's not about just blindly accepting everything, but about being really honest about what's actually useful.
Yeah.
What moves you closer to the life you want to be living.
And he uses that example, right, of his friend who's trying to, justify drug use with pragmatism.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, hold on. This isn't about easy answers, It's about what actually serves you, what actually feels true in your life. And sometimes that means challenging those assumptions about what should work.
Absolutely.
Like he tells that story about living in the city, right?
Yeah.
He had all the reasons in the world to be in the city, thriving, but ultimately it wasn't fueling him.
It wasn't the right fit.
And he ends up back in his hometown, smaller, quieter.
Right, he finds way more peace and productivity.
Yeah, and it's like, that's such a good reminder. What works for one person,
Yeah.
totally different for someone else.
Yeah.
There's no one size fits all.
100%.
Which is kind of freeing in a way.
It is.
Because we get so caught up in comparing ourselves, our paths, our timelines.
And our definitions of success.
Yes. And what if the journey is actually uncovering what works for you?
Absolutely. What feels true and authentic.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
like that's the real win.
It's about tuning out the noise and tuning into yourself.
I love that. And speaking of tuning out the noise, he talks about this idea of quieting that inner critic.
Oh, yeah. The inner critic can be brutal.
Right. So loud sometimes.
For sure.
And he challenges this assumption that being smart means you have the answer right away.
Oh, interesting.
That quick thinking, that's intelligence. And he actually suggests the opposite.
Does he have like a counter argument for that, or?
He does. That's where the Derek Sivers quote comes in. And Sivers is brilliant, this super successful entrepreneur, and he's all about slowing down,
Oh,
really
okay.
pondering before you jump in.
That's interesting.
And his quote is, "Your first reaction is usually outdated."
I like that.
Isn't that good?
It is, because I think a lot of times we feel this pressure to, like, have the snappy comeback or the
Yeah. Oh, yeah, or just to have an answer right away.
to have it all figured out, and it's
Yeah,
like
God.
sometimes you need time to process.
Totally. And that actually ties back into what we were talking about with all those biases, right?
Right.
Foroux actually encourages people to like go look up the full list of cognitive biases.
Wow, it's a long list.
It's a lot, but it's not meant to be intimidating. It's meant to be empowering.
I think I see where he's going with that, yeah.
Because once you realize how many ways our brains are trying to simplify, how prone we are to these shortcuts,
Yeah.
it takes the pressure off. It's not about being perfectly logical all the time.
It's about being aware.
Exactly. Self-awareness is the key.
Yeah, and then you can make more conscious choices.
Totally. And speaking of choices, I thought his distinction between truth and facts was so interesting.
Oh, tell me about that.
He uses the example of like God,
Okay.
a higher power, right? It's something that people have debated forever.
Right.
And instead of getting bogged down in like, is it a fact? Is it provable?
Yeah.
He's like, what if it's about what you hold to be true, what shapes your reality?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's like instead of trying to win the argument or prove the fact, it's like what we hold to be true, what we live by, that shapes our reality.
And that's what matters ultimately.
It really is.
It's about how we're actually living our lives, not just the things we say we believe.
Exactly. You know, those core beliefs that end up guiding our actions, whether we realize it or not.
And that actually segues perfectly into this next idea of, okay, we've done all this thinking, we've quieted the inner critic, we've challenged our assumptions, but then there's that hurdle of actually putting it all into action.
Right. Because it's one thing to have these great ideas floating around in your head,
Totally.
but turning them into something real, something tangible, that's where the rubber meets the road.
It's easy to get stuck in analysis paralysis, I feel like.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Overthinking every little detail,
Yeah.
second-guessing yourself before you even start.
And that's where I think Forough's advice about money is so helpful, especially for anyone listening who struggles with financial anxiety.
Oh, yeah, his money rules really struck a chord with me, too. They're surprisingly simple, but so powerful.
What was your biggest takeaway from those rules?
That it's not actually about hoarding money or obsessing over every penny.
Okay.
It's about investing in yourself and your skills so you always have the ability to earn more.
It's about that internal sense of security.
Exactly, knowing that no matter what life throws your way, you have the tools and the knowledge to adapt and thrive.
I love that. It's so empowering.
It is. It's about taking control of your own destiny rather than feeling at the mercy of external circumstances.
And I think that ties into his point about letting go, too.
Yeah.
And he's not just talking about meditation here.
No, he's talking about finding those ways to release the mind from that constant churning, to create space for those unexpected breakthroughs.
It's like those aha moments you have in the shower, right?
Exactly. When you've stepped away from the problem, given your mind a break, and suddenly the solution appears out of nowhere.
It's like our brains need that space, that freedom to do their best work. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is step away from the computer, put down the to-do list, and just let our minds wander.
It's like that saying, sleep on it. Often a fresh perspective comes when we give ourselves permission to step away from the problem for a bit.
I'm so glad you brought that up because this whole deep dive has me questioning everything I thought I knew about decision-making. Remember when Foroux said to ditch the pro-con list?
Oh yeah, that threw me for a loop too. Isn't that how we're supposed to make rational decisions?
Right. But his point is that those lists often oversimplify things. We get so caught up in listing out the individual pros and cons that we miss the bigger picture, the nuances that might actually sway our decision one way or the other.
It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You end up forcing it, and it just doesn't work.
He uses relationships as an example, and it's so true. Every pro-con list about staying or leaving a relationship boils down to the same generic points.
Yeah, and it never really gets to the heart of the matter, does it? It's like those lists can't capture the complexity of human emotions and connections.
Exactly. It's not just a logical equation. Sometimes the most fulfilling path is the one we create ourselves, not the one dictated by a list of pros and cons.
It's about trusting our gut, our intuition, and being open to possibilities that might not fit neatly into those boxes we try to create.
And you know what that reminds me of? His analogy of the maze. When we're so focused on finding that next right step, we might miss the bigger picture, the solution that's right outside the lines we've drawn for
It's
ourselves.
like we're so busy navigating the twists and turns that we forget to look up and see if there's a bridge somewhere, a shortcut we haven't considered.
Like in that story you told about accidentally emailing Wim, seemed like a small detail, but it ended up costing him thousands of dollars.
Talk about sweating the small stuff.
Yeah.
But it really highlights how crucial details can be. Overlooking them, even if they seem insignificant at the time, can have ripple effects we never anticipated.
It's a good reminder to slow down to pay attention. It's easy to get caught up in the rush to prioritize speed over accuracy, but sometimes those small moments of mindfulness make all the difference.
Absolutely. And you know what I appreciate about Foroux? He's honest about his own struggles with this. He's not presenting himself as some kind of self-help guru who has it all figured out.
He's just a normal person trying to figure things out like the rest of us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's a fellow traveler on this path of personal growth, and I find that really relatable.
Me too. It makes his advice feel more attainable, more human.
It's not about being perfect. It's about striving for improvement every single day.
And speaking of striving for improvement, you know what really stuck with me? His grandmother's story about her regrets.
Oh yeah, that was a powerful one. It reminds us that life is short, too short to let fear hold us back from pursuing what truly matters to us.
Her biggest regret wasn't what she did, but what she didn't do. It's a call to action for all of us, isn't it? To be bold, to take chances, to live a life full of experiences, even if it means stepping outside our comfort zones.
It's about embracing those what-if moments and seeing where they lead us. Because at the end of the day, wouldn't we rather have a story full of "at least I tried" than "I wish I had"?
This deep dive has been incredible. So much to think about, and even more importantly, to put into action. If you had to pick just one thing, one nugget of wisdom from Foro that really resonated with you, what would it be?
You know, for me, it's that recurring theme of self-awareness. His commitment to questioning his own assumptions, to recognizing his own biases, that's what allows him to adapt and grow. It's a powerful reminder for all of us that thinking straight isn't a destination. It's a continuous journey of self-discovery.
And what better adventure is there than that? To our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to embrace the power of your own thoughts. Until next time, keep those minds sharp, those hearts open, and as always, keep diving deeper.